Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back as we continue going through our favorite 100 movies of all time. Tonight we're on episode number 77, and we are up to number 24 on our list. Talking about Swingers for Me from 1996, the Doug Liman movie that put Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn on the map. And we're talking about The Shining from 1980 for John, his number 24, my number 40. And keeping in spirit of spooky season, John has decided that his light is not going to work in his room. So if you're watching this, you are getting a legitimate horror experience watching John's light just continuously flicker as he sits there. So John, thanks for staying in character here.
Oh, well, I had to. I mean, I'm not sure if the light's flickering because, evil entities in my house, or maybe it's just my alcoholism.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll find out.
We'll find out. You're not actually talking to anybody, John. This all happened a long time ago. But Swingers is really, it's like a cult movie for sure, because it definitely has like a following at this point, but it's a cult movie. The Shining was a Razzie winner, not an Oscar winner, a Razzie winner, which just shows you how idiotic Hollywood stuff has been literally since the dawn of time. They love to just do like the we're going to get the clicks thing. Even back in 1980, when you weren't getting clicks, it was like, we can show Stanley Kubrick and Jack Nicholson that they stink. And it's like, yeah, you guys really had that one work out for you. But Razzie winner, The Shining, from 1980, now widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest horror movie ever made, and one of just the best movies of all time. So be fun to talk about both of these, John. You know that The Shining is less popular than Swingers, right? So we got to start with that, right?
I do. Yeah, I totally know.
Starting with Swingers, John.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, My introduction to Swingers, this was the first time I've watched Swingers. And my introduction to Swingers, you remember that episode of The Sopranos with Jon Favreau in it?
I literally don't. What season is it? Because I only got up to
season 2 or 3, and like Chris goes to New York and like meets Jon Favreau and stuff. He's just talking about Swingers the entire time. That's kind of my entire.
That when Christopher's trying to like write screenplays, so he writes the dialogue.
Yes, that's exactly when. So that was like my entire experience with Swingers for a very until today. I knew like of a couple scenes. I knew of like the voicemail scene, which we are definitely getting into today. Don't worry. But other than that, like I knew it was kind of like this popular movie that like people talked about. Wasn't really sure what it was about. At one point, I was wondering if it was about swing dancing, because there's a lot of jazz in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
The movie didn't quite do it for me. I've come around on Hangout movies a lot lately, but this one just didn't hit the mark for me.
Well, so first of all, this is my movie. I will do the intro on it. So for me, Swingers is probably the reason why this ends up at number 24. So like this isn't the case for a movie like LA Confidential, which I'm going to be talking about next week. But Swingers is a defining movie for me. Like this movie defined a portion of my life. American Beauty, The Deer Hunter, Amelie, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. If you say American Beauty to me, I'm a freshman in high school. And that movie literally changed my life. Like that movie literally changed my life. You say Amelie to me, I'm a senior in high school. And that movie literally changed my life. Like, and I mean that in terms of like a way of looking at things. And like, I really believe that like film, books, art has a way to change people's lives. It can sound ridiculous, but if it wasn't for American Beauty, I'd be making a lot more money right now, because I would have never tried to go after this Hollywood thing, and I wouldn't have tried to be a writer. Like that would not have been what I was doing. But the thing with Swingers is the first time I watched this movie, I was going to school at Miami. I think I was my senior year or something. And I really enjoyed the movie. Like I really liked it. Wasn't a top 100 movie for me. I moved to LA with my friend, and we were there maybe 3 months, and I said, we got to watch Swingers. Like, both of us were at that point. Like we moved out there in September. We're interning, we're delivering food, we're Ubering. Like it's just the bullshit. It's the total bullshit of LA. Everybody thinks it's the land of milk and honey. It's the land of like homeless people and dirt. Like it really is. It's terrible. It's overpriced. Like I hate Los Angeles. I really do. And yet Los Angeles hold some of my best memories that I'll ever have in my entire life. And I miss LA sometimes, but I miss my part of LA. I miss what I did in LA. I don't miss Los Angeles. Los Angeles sucks, but I miss what I went through in Los Angeles. And we watched Swingers, and it's just a perfect depiction of being in your early 20s in Hollywood and having no connection to anybody that can actually help you. And so you're out there, you're a transplant, just like 80% of the people who want to work in entertainment. You know, there's a lot of people who are born and raised in LA. They're the people you don't hear about. They're the people who run normal businesses and work at banks. But for everybody who wants to work in entertainment, they're all coming from the East Coast. I mean, my friend's from Long Island. I'm from Jersey. Like, we were those guys moving out there and being like, let's make it happen. We had the friend who had been out there a year before and was working at Warner Brothers, and like, holy shit, man, he's at Warner Brothers. This is great. I ended up working at Warner Brothers 3 years later. It wasn't that great. But like, it's just so spot on about the people you meet, about the parties you go to, about how the bars are. I mean, this movie's 1996. I moved to LA in 2015. This is 20 years later. It's the same thing. You're bumping into people. The scene with Favreau where he's the whole, oh, what are you doing here? Oh, this is great. And he goes, who was that? I don't know. The amount of times that happens out there, and it's not like I was like, oh, I'm the guy who like everybody knows who I am. No, that's not how it was. You would see people talk to each other, and it would just be like, that person has no effing clue who they're talking to. It's just such a realistic depiction of LA. I love the characters. I love the talks and everything. I love all the inside jokes about it, and I totally understand why people who haven't spent a significant amount of time in LA don't like this movie or don't get it or don't see the appeal. But to me, this was what my life, I feel like this is literally what my life was like from like 2015 to 2020. Not the same everything. I thankfully I was never there when somebody pulled a gun on somebody else, but just those random interactions, the falling over each other, who are you going to pick up in the middle of the night that's going to show up with you at the next bar like they do with Charles or Chuck or whatever the hell his name is in this movie. Like, all of the feelings, this place is dead anyway, or we're going to go to this party at this time just so that we can hope that somebody blah, blah. Like, it's all so real. And every time I watch it, it makes me feel so good. Like, it really does. I mean, John, you know, I'm going through a miserable time right now. And this movie just put me in such a good mood. Since I finished it today, I finished it at like 6:30. I've been in a great mood since 6:30. That's a win, you know, and that's just what this movie does for me.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, it's a well-written movie. Like, Favreau's script is really solid. The dialect is very good in it. And yeah, my big thing was like, I just don't connect to it that well. I was more in line with like Jon Favreau's character at that point in my life. I will admit that. So like, I'm connecting to Jon Favreau's character, but like the longer and longer you go on in this movie, and the more he's like still clinging on to this previous relationship, it gets so cringy, and it's just like, I don't know if I want to be relating to this character anymore.
But we all, like, that's the thing. Like, I said the same thing. Like, what I really appreciate about this is I can see myself in all the characters. All of them, like in different various ways, you know, like every now and then you get the confidence of a Vince Vaughn. Like, you get that confidence of Trent where you're just like, wow, everybody loves me. This is going to be great. It's awesome. Then every now and then you get the depression of Mike. And then every now and then you get like the just feeling of failure, like Ron Livingston's character in this, or like anything like that. Like, I can connect with everybody. But what I appreciate so much for what Favreau did is he pulled no punches. Yeah. He's out there in LA. He's miserable about being broken up with this girl for 6 months. And the cringy situations that he is in, you can feel the breakdown happening. The scene in the trailer where he's got to check his messages. And the girls are so upset. And Vince Vaughn's just like, dude, you got to be kidding me. Like, you can check them when you get home. Like, that scene is so brutal. The phone call scene with the voicemail might be the most cringeworthy scene ever put on film. It is so hard to watch. Every time I'm like, thank God I have a phone so I can stare at it and it can protect me from this. Like, it's so hard to watch. but you feel this mental breakdown, and then we see him really have his mental breakdown. Like, it's just that feeling of loneliness, and that's what this is a movie. This movie is about loneliness. Like, it's he's broken up with a girlfriend of 6 years, but it's being in this new space that you're not familiar with, and you go around at night with these guys who are your friends, but none of them get you and you don't get them. And you're in a city where you're not achieving what you want to achieve at a quick enough pace, and you're just watching these other people succeed. And you feel that loneliness and then that depression and that feeling of like, when is this ever going to get better? Yeah. That is Los Angeles. Like, I hate to be like that, but unless you somehow move out there and you're Mr. Peanut Butter from BoJack Horseman, where ads keep hitting you in the face while you walk down Hollywood Boulevard, LA sucks when you first get there, when you're trying to do this stuff. Like, it is terrible. And I just feel like this movie nails that. And it nails the pathetic moments of like young 20-somethings when they are desperate, when they are lonely, when they are at their most vulnerable. We do stupid shit when we're at our most vulnerable.
Yes.
And this movie and this movie just handles it in a way that they're not going to the extreme. Sue could have killed those guys, but that's not what this movie's about. This movie's about what kind of idiot are you? But everybody has their thing. Everybody has it. And that's what I think this movie is so good at depicting.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because, I mean, these characters aren't their early 20s, right? Like, they're their mid to late 20s.
Like, I think like they say like 24, 25, 26.
Yeah, that makes sense-ish.
Yeah.
And like, you can feel that mid-20s naivety on all of these characters, where like Jon Favreau's going through this breakup, or has experienced this breakup, and it feels like the end of the world to him. Right? And like, in those moments, you can tell the type of character Jon Favreau is. You can tell that he was never really the cool one at all. And having a friend like Trent kind of exasperates the fact that he doesn't feel like the cool one. He doesn't feel like he can have anything. And he feels like he being out of this relationship is just like him losing his chance at love, essentially, right? And like you said, it's that loneliness and a fear of never finding it again. And then you have Trent, who's just so damn cocky the entire time, despite the fact that he's the biggest loser in this movie.
Oh, he's awful. He's brutal. But it works for him, right? Like, I think that's the other thing. Like, if you think about Trent could be so much more despicable. But at the end of the day, like, Trent gets the girls, and what he says is working for him. And Trent is the one who gets the guys who they almost kill to like be their buddies. And they just love Trent, man. Like, he really is like that guy. Like, Trent's just such a frat bro who never went to college, like, as they say in this, but he's just such like a frat guy where it's like, oh, we're just going to go out. We're going to talk to the beautiful babies. And it's so money. Like, it's so, and then he's sitting there at the end crying while Jon Favreau's dancing with Heather Graham. Like, that stuff kills me. And then he's the one in the bar who's talking crap to the waitress at the end of the movie. And then he's standing up screaming to embarrass everybody. Like, just doesn't care. Just doesn't, like, we all know that person who is like, oh my God, what are you doing? Where now that we're in our 30s, John, if we still knew that person, we'd be like, dude, what the F is wrong with you? But when you're 23, 24, 25, you're like, damn, dude, like, we're going to tell this story one day about what an asshole this guy was. Like, it's great. And ultimately, at the end of the movie, Trent gets his because he thinks that the girl's playing this really weird baby game with him. And really, it's just she's talking to a baby, a literal baby. So,
I think the character that I like the most in this, though, is Ron Livingston's character, Rob. I think like his story, this whole like goofy story, is so fascinating to me because he's come to LA to be this actor. And his pilot didn't get picked up. So he's like, okay, I'm playing Goofy. And then you kind of start realizing he means Goofy at Disneyland. And then you start realizing that he didn't get the job. That he thought he was so much better for it.
They had somebody with more theme park experience. That's the heartbreaking line. Theme park experience.
And like that's that moment where it's just like, this is that 20 something mentality that people have where they're not sure where they want to be, and they think they are so much grander than they really are, and that they can do so much more than they're actually doing. And I mean, a lot of this comes down to, I think like a lot of this comes down to like the idea of like the American dream and like the school system in North America and stuff, like telling people to like dream big all the time. And like this band's destroyed because of it.
Yeah.
And I that's the part of this movie that really hits me, is that idea of like kind of accepting your place in the world. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself falling even further.
Well, and I think, but that's Los Angeles, and I think that's why. So Rob's speech to Jon Favreau in the apartment when Jon Favreau was at his lowest is one of my favorite moments ever, because that moment, like, you live in Los Angeles, you're a dude in your 20s, you're not getting that speech. You're not going to get that. However, that is the speech that everybody in LA needs when it's bad. Because the thing with Los Angeles was, I always said with Los Angeles, it was like the Newton's law. Every reaction has an equal and opposite, or every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? That's Los Angeles. Every time something good would happen, your car would get towed. You get a new job, your car gets towed. Or you got a girl's number, well, now you have like strep throat or something. Like every time something good happened, something bad also had to happen. It couldn't just be like everything is going well. However, there'd always seem to be like, if something bad happened, there was like a 50-50 shot that it was going to be something good or something bad that would follow. If something good happened, you knew something bad was coming. Like, don't go outside, don't get on a plane that day because it might go down. Like, that's how bad LA is. But like, that's kind of how it felt a lot out there. It's crazy, but that's how it felt. That speech, though, got me through a lot of moments in Los Angeles. Darkest days, worst days. That was the days where you say, what the hell am I doing? Like, why am I here? Why am I putting myself through this? Why am I working for abusive people? Why am I working ridiculous hours? Why am I spending almost $1,500 a month on rent just by myself when I'm barely making that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's those ideas in your head. And that speech is all about, you have to remind yourself that it's all about your perspective. No matter where you are, whether it's Los Angeles, whether it's Canada, whether it's Florida, it's all about your perspective. Like Ron Livingston says in that scene, it's sunny every day here. Every day. Like, to me, that's such a massive line, even though it's not, because it really is. Los Angeles, it's sunny like 95% of the time. But that line of it's sunny every day here, it's like there's opportunity every day when you're in Los Angeles. And what am I doing that's so successful? What, I played a bus driver in a movie and I do an open mic. You host an open mic in LA, that's a big freaking deal, dude. Like, that's a big deal. Like, you're making progress. He got turned down for Goofy at a theme park, but he's not going to leave LA, because how do you leave it? Like, you're there, you're in it, you're doing it. Like, that speech to me, it's like, it's your perspective. It's how you want to view things. You can say, look, I'm not living up to what Joe Schmo is doing. Not for nothing, Saoirse Ronan was famous when she was 11. John, if you became an actor, you could become really successful. You're never going to be as successful as Saoirse Ronan was when she was 11 years old. That doesn't mean you're not successful. Morgan Freeman didn't become successful until he was like 50-something. It's just, what is your perspective? Are you okay with the fact that you came out there with nothing and now you're doing things? You're making progress. And what I love about this movie and that speech and everything is, Ron Livingston is still out of place and doesn't belong yet. He doesn't belong at all. Mike, he belongs in LA. Like, he fits in LA, but he's introspective. Trent, he's LA, but he is I'm not going to look at like the real, like, I'm just going to live my 20s and that's all it's going to be. I'll worry about it later. Those are three very different characters. And yet all three of them are different personalities that you have in your 20s. And like, just the fear the I don't give a shit mentality, and the oh my God, I am failing beyond belief right now. You get turned down for an internship. You can't even get an internship when you have a 4-year college degree and you're 22 years old, 23 years old. Can't even get an unpaid internship. It's a kick in the ass. And it happens every day, every single day. But how do you look at it? Once you get one, you start rolling, you start rolling, you start rolling. That scene got me through months of my life, like months. It's one of the best ever.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get that because it is one of those things that you just need to hear in your mid-20s. And I do wish more people heard it, like you said. Like, it's just what needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously this movie put Favreau and Vaughn on the map. Livingston became kind of famous, did Office Space, and then kind of like, he's like in and out, right? Like he Band of Brothers.
Well, this was his big time period, right? He had like this 4-year stretch here where he was really popular.
Yeah, and then he kind of fell off a little bit. Like Office Space, he's an adaptation for like 2 seconds. Band of Brothers, he was big, Swingers, but then, that was really, he kind of just became like a bit actor after that. But like, I mean, it shows, I think what this movie does, it kind of shows like Vince Vaughn really could act like from the start. Like he plays such a dick in this movie, but like Vince Vaughn is like, he's cooking, man. Like he had like a natural charisma. I feel like that, like he somehow made this character likable, even though he does just say things where you're like, my God, this guy is the freaking worst.
Oh, he is. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Like Trent is just that type of person you just groan when you're around.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the little things in this character. It's like the decisions he makes of where to go, right? Mm-hmm. It's like when they drive to Vegas in the middle of the night. First off, I didn't realize Vegas was that close to LA.
It's 4.5 hours away. It's not that close.
I found that out. I Googled it afterwards.
And that's why it's Vegas, baby. And then it's Vegas, baby. Like that is a miserable drive. And there's nothing but desert.
I mean, trust me, like I lived in the middle of nowhere. It was more than that to get to a city of 10,000 people when I was living there. I know that drive.
Yeah.
But like, and then you get to Vegas and you're not even on the strip.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and like, it's those moments that really articulate Trent's character and show what type of person he is and how kind of fake this persona he puts on is. And that's why you kind of still like him, because he's not this douchebag he's portraying.
There's a lot of insecurity with him. And it's like, hey, if we were to go over to the MGM, we don't belong at the MGM. But if I go here, we're surrounded by old people. I love Jon Favreau being like, no, it's dead here. Like literally, like it's dead. Like people are dead. Like I love that. But it's like, that's where they go because they think they're going to be hot shots there. But in reality, like they're not hot shots anywhere. Like they're showing up in Vegas with $300. Doesn't matter if it's 1996, 2022, or 1945. You show up with $300 in Vegas, nobody gives a shit. And like, I think that, like, you're right. Like it's all those things, but it's also, why are they showing up? Oh, the party starts at 8. So we're going to go to we'll go to the bar at 10, and then we'll meet to get dinner at 11. Then we'll show up at 12. Like they can't be there before everybody else because it's such an insecurity thing. When you're going to call? Oh, you wait a day. So I call her tomorrow. No. You wait a day and then a day. So really it's 2 days. Yeah. Well, how long are you going to wait? 6 days. Like, it's all an insecurity, afraid of denial, afraid of being rejected, all of that stuff. And it's behind this fake male bravado that he puts on the entire time, although some of that bravado is real because it works for him some of the time. But his people are kind of like the lower life people. Like he's not a high roller. He does fit in better with these kind of like waitresses at this crappy thing who live in a trailer park or whatever.
He really feels like that big fish in a small pond type of character where he's the hot shot because he keeps everyone. He makes sure he spends his time with people who are beneath him.
Yes.
All the time. And I think that's what makes this character so interesting. I do think that like Trent has kind of some of the greatest moments in the movie. I love the scene where they're at the party and he goes for the phone number and like the Jaws theme starts playing.
Dude, so good.
Like the film illusions in that you get Jon Favreau's love for film in this movie, which is great. And those are the parts I like the most of this movie, like the discussions about what was it? Like the Goodfellas versus Reservoir Dogs conversation, and then like,
how You got to think too, like something, John, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but you got to think this was only 2 years after Pulp Fiction. So when they're talking about Tarantino, this is like fresh, and Goodfellas is only 5 years old at this point, or 6 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it just really goes to show Jon Favreau's love for film. And I mean, I hate to rain on your parade, but this movie is why we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Phil. So we have to give it a few marks down for that.
I should.
But in the end, like, this is much better than anything else Jon Favreau's done, in my opinion. So,
well, that's not good because you only gave it 2 stars, John.
I don't think Jon Favreau's done many good things.
There you go. Well, there you go. Yeah, it's just like, I don't know. Like there's just it's one of those movies that like if you get it, you get it. And I don't mean that from like like you didn't understand The Usual Suspects. I mean like if you get it, you get it. If you feel it, you feel it. Like we have Everybody Wants Some coming up for me in a couple weeks. Damn, I remember like I was living with at that time I was in a 3-bedroom with a guy and a girl. And I remember going to see Everybody Wants Some being like, that is the best effing movie of all time. And the girl I was living with was like, that movie sucked so bad. And I was like, well, you just like, you're not me. Like, you don't get it. Like, it's like, it's like when you start discovering movies like Swingers, Everybody Wants Some, things like that, all of a sudden you start to understand the appeal for some people of like a New Year's Eve or a Valentine's Day or like those, because it's like, that's what you want from a movie. Like, I've never felt that a movie could connect more with me than like Swingers or Everybody Wants Some. Like this movie feels like me and my friends going out in LA. Where are we going to go tonight? Well, we'll start at the Den, then we'll work our way to the Surly Goat, then we'll make our way over to the whatever the hell was across the street. I can't remember the name of it. It was some Russian bar. Like, that's what we would do. I mean, that is literally what it would be. It would just be like, we know we're not going to stay at any of the places because as soon as, my version of Vince Vaughn gets turned down, we all have to leave and go somewhere else because, this place is dead anyway. What does that mean? It means nobody's like kissing your toes. That's what it means. Yeah. It's just a fantastic depiction of like the male ego, what it means to live in Los Angeles, like, and all these other things. Also, Heather Graham being in it for like 5 seconds. I love how it comes full circle though with her.
As like the second billed person in this movie.
Well, because she had been in Twin Peaks, man. She was huge compared to these guys. Like, these guys were nobodies. And the next year, she's in Boogie Nights.
Yeah, I know. But it was just like, I had known Heather Graham was like second billed in this movie. I'm just waiting for her to show up. And it's like the end of the movie. I'm like, okay. I guess that's
she's in full circle. But there's a lot of great like things about like relationships and everything in this. Why don't they call? Well, they know not to call until you've actually forgot about them. And she puts the thing in there and you're like, oh man, she's going to call him because his number is on there. They show you that right before and you get the phone call. Like, that's her. And then it ends up being Michelle. And you know what? He's done with Michelle because now Lorraine is calling. Like, those are the types of things. Like, to me, this is just such a great feel good movie. And one that just like reminds me of like, man, being in your 20s is fun. Like, being in your 20s is a lot of freaking fun. And that's why I love this movie. So John, you asked me this morning, you said this morning, I can't wait to see why you like this movie. Well, now I've told you.
I understand. I totally get it. It's like you said when I was texting you, like, I don't get it because I haven't lived in LA. So we'll see the next time when Everyone Wants Some comes up.
Yeah.
We'll see if my college experience is enough for me to relate to that one more than I did to Swingers.
Yeah.
But I mean, we still haven't talked about this cringy phone call because, my God, that is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in any movie ever.
Dude, that scene. So I have a friend who I was like, you got to watch Swingers. Like, you'll love it, whatever. So he watched it, started it, whatever. He got to that scene. I was texting him today and I was like, dude, that phone call scene. He goes, yep, I have never watched anything beyond that scene. I turned it off at that point. Like, I just couldn't take it anymore.
Wow.
Because he was like, unfortunately, I see a little bit of myself in that. And now that I've ever gone to that point, but it's kind of like the Call to the Void, where like you watch a movie where somebody jumps off the top of a building. You're like, I don't like that because I get the call to the void and I want to,
Yeah.
So, he didn't watch it, but dude, that scene where he just keeps going and going and going and going. And like, first you're like, okay, called her, left a voicemail. Like, doesn't know if got the number, just like leave the number, whatever. And then he goes to leave the number again. It gets cut off and then he goes to do it again. And then by the end of it, he's just, this isn't working out between the two of us. Like, it's so freaking brutal And it's just like, that's how low this guy is, though.
But it's such a brilliantly written scene because it just plays in your expectations, because it just fills you with so much dread because you don't want him to phone back. And like, he takes that, it's that pregnant pause he takes before making the second phone call where you're like, okay, the second phone call is still understandable, but like, okay, this is a little cringe. It's the fourth phone call that does it. That's the point where you're like, oh, this is not going to end well.
No, not at all. And it's so uncomfortable, but thank God for texting now, huh? For all you kids who are dating now, you're so lucky that you have texting, because you can just say, hey, nice meeting you tonight. See you later. You don't have to worry about if the number went through or not. Like, oh my God.
Caller ID makes it so much easier.
Caller, I know this was before the days of caller ID, man. I know you're around my age. I mean, man, caller ID was like 2000, right? Like, that was when that started to become popular. Like, I remember going to friends' houses, like when I was cognizant, and being like, you guys don't have caller ID?
Yeah.
Half the time it would just come up as unavailable anyway.
That's true. What a different world we lived in back in 1996. Dude,
it's so crazy to think that was 26 years ago, and it might as well have been 100.
Yeah.
Like, do you think the world's changed more since 1996 to now, or from like 1926 to 1996? Like really, it's crazy when you start thinking about that stuff. You know, I was using 1926.
Too deep for this podcast.
I was using 1926 because that was the year before the Oscars began. So that's kind of like where my head was going with that. Was like from 1926 to 1996, got the Oscar movies, blah blah blah. From 1996 till now, it's like, dude, there's people who will watch that scene now, and if they're like 17, 18 years old, they won't know what the hell's going on.
Which is one of the wildest
checking his messages.
Yeah,
he's got a calling card.
He's got a calling card. What's a calling card? Like, I legitimately sat there and thought, oh, that's what a calling card's for. I had no idea, because I never had to use a calling card.
Yep. It's crazy. It's awesome, though. I love it. Anyway. All right, John, it's been 3 days. Not even. It's been literally like 72 hours. Well, I guess less than 72 hours, because it hasn't been 3 days. But I didn't watch anything. Honestly, what I'm most excited for is I am going to be watching the Universal Monster Classic movies coming up. That's what I'm most excited for. I rewatched The Mummy a couple nights ago, like the 1932 one. I got this package that has like Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, all those. So I'm going to try to watch all. It was an 8-movie package. I watched one of them. I'm going to try to watch the other 7 prior to Halloween, just because like they're cozy horror movies. And like, as much as I love being scared with like a House of the Devil or The Descent or It Follows or anything like that, sometimes it's just nice to watch like an old school cozy like horror movie. There's just something, and they're all like an hour and 10 minutes long. It is a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing. But what's the best movie you watched this week?
Well, it's October, so I've decided I'm going to watch at least one horror movie every day for this month, which has been difficult so far. Some days I get home from work and I'm like, I don't know if I want to watch a horror movie, but I'm going to do it anyways. I watched Suspiria on Sunday night, which is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. Rewatching it, the original, the 1977 version.
Yeah.
2018 version is also fantastic, but the 1977 version, Dario Argento, that music by the Goblins, it's fantastic. Probably ends up on my next iteration of the top 100, but I don't even think it's the best one I watched. And this is weird because I watched Pulse, the 2001, not the 2006 American remake. I watched the 2001 Japanese version by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. That movie, I watched it. I'm like, oh yeah, this is a 4-star movie, and I have not stopped thinking about this movie since I watched it.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those movies that just lingers with you. It's haunting. It's so lonely. It's so sad and depressing, and I can't stop thinking about it. I have to watch it again, but because I'm pretty sure this might be one of the greatest horror movies ever made.
Yeah, I want to check. I mean, I'd never even heard of it before you said it. I think I'd only heard of the remake. So I'll definitely have to check that out at some point. You got me thinking though, because you had said like horror movies and whatever, you were trying to do like a top 100 horror movies.
Yeah.
The other night, I just tried to throw something together after watching The Shining, just like even throw 100 horror movies into a list. I got to 76, man. Like, it's hard. Like, I got to really. And then it's also like, what do you consider horror?
Yes.
Because Requiem for a Dream to me is like one of the scariest movies ever made, but it's not a horror movie. But that movie scared the shit out of me.
I gave myself the rule that if the IMDb page lists the genre as horror, it can count.
Yeah, but like, you know what I think is stupid? Like, and this is just like the truth. Shaun of the Dead is not a horror movie. I'm so tired of seeing Shaun of the Dead on like best horror movie of all time list, because it's not a horror movie. It's comedy. It's comedy. Like, I get it's a horror comedy, but it's comedy.
I agree. I stretch it some, like The Lighthouse is one of those ones that's like really on the border for me. Is it a horror movie? Is it not? But for the most part, IMDb sets it. If it says horror is in the genre, I count it towards my top 100 horror.
Where does it say the genre? I'm on freaking Requiem for a Dream. Drug addiction, heroin, sex show, sex scene, addiction. Does that count as horror, John?
No. Requiem for a Dream on IMDb just says drama.
That's crazy, man. That's the scariest movie I've ever seen. Like, that movie messed me up forever. Inland Empire to me should be a horror movie. I don't think it's listed as horror.
I don't disagree. That movie is.
Yeah, I have to make like my own rules.
Your own rules for what a horror is.
Yeah, did it scare me? There's a Australian movie called Wake and Fright that has Donald Pleasance in it. Movie's terrifying.
Yeah,
it's not a horror movie, but it's scary as hell. Like, it's like, man, I don't want to live like that. But it's not technically a horror movie. I still think it should be listed as a horror movie.
But speaking of
horror
movies,
The
Shining. This is actually one that I think might drop in my top 100 next time I reevaluate it.
Drop in a bad way, right?
Yeah, I think I understand why people think this is one of the greatest horror movies of all time. It is.
Oh my God, John's about to trash his number 24.
I'm not going to trash it. I still really enjoy this movie. I really love this movie. But like, while I'm making this top 100 horror list, I just realized that I have other horror movies in my top 100 that I like more than this movie. And that's what I realized on this rewatch. But there's so much good about this movie. The way Kubrick approaches this, the way that it just starts with the tracking, like the high altitude tracking shot with the Dearest Irae playing, phenomenal. The use of classical music, the use of Penderecki in this movie, incredible. The performances, despite how dubiously Kubrick got some of them, all fantastic.
Sometimes you gotta hit people, man. Sometimes you just gotta hit.
No, you don't. You really don't. but in the end, like, I get why people say this is one of the greatest horror movies of all time. It's crafted so well. One of the most contentious and one of the best decisions Kubrick made with this was to leave the source of what drives Jack Torrance mad ambiguous, which is infamously why Stephen King hates this movie.
Yeah.
Because he says that there's no way someone can go this mad without supernatural influences. But
Stephen King's gone pretty mad too, though, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably because of substances, which is what Kubrick's implying in this movie. So it hits really hard. It's an isolated horror movie. I love isolated horror movies. I love it when people are taken out of their environment. They are put into a enclosed space. And the Overlook Hotel is just such a different isolated horror film because you're isolated from everything, but you're in this massive, vast building.
Mm-hmm.
That's also this terrifying character in this film. It deserves a lot of praise. It's wild to think that it was nominated and won a Razzie. You'll find very few people who don't list this as one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and that's just simple as that.
Now, when you say you're going to drop it down, I mean, you have this at number 24. You just talked about this like this was a steaming pile of shit. Where are you dropping this to, John? Like, how far are we talking?
Like maybe 30. Like, it's not dropping that far. If anything, it's dropping because things are rising up of it, rather than it's dropping because I like it less than where I have it placed.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, and that's the same thing for me. Like, so horror is the hardest one for me in terms of a genre, right? Because like, it's kind of the same thing with comedy. If you really look at my top 100, and if I made a list of the 100 greatest comedies of all time based on my top 100, then I guess Amelie is the number one comedy scene, because Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a romance, and The Deer Hunter is a drama, and American Beauty is listed as a drama. Even though American Beauty is, I think, one of the funniest movies ever made, it's a drama. But Amelie is the first one on my list that's a comedy. Amelie is by no means the funniest movie I've ever seen. It's not even close. Like, it's no Animal House. It's no, Borat. But I like Amelie so much more. Horror, I feel like, has the same thing. Like, as in terms of from a scary sense, The Shining has some moments. Like, and the isolation and all of that. Like, The Shining is a scary movie. But if you look at the movies that I have in my top 100 that are horror movies, Psycho, Rosemary's Baby, The Shining, Alien, The Exorcist, and then, Jaws and Silence of the Lambs. But I had to stop before Jaws because those first five, they're all psychological horror movies. Like, if you were to say to me, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen? It's not Psycho. But Psycho's the best horror movie I've ever seen. And you can't tell me Psycho's not a horror movie. It might be a thriller, but it's a horror movie. Like, that is a scary movie. There are moments, that shower scene is iconically scary. But it's not the scariest movie I've ever seen, but it's my number one horror movie, if you asked me. And that's what I have such a hard time with when it comes to horror, though, because it's like, when you rank your favorite 100 movies, The Shining landed at number 40 for me. It landed at number 24 for you. But if I was to rank my favorite horror movies, I might put The Descent above The Shining, even though I like The Shining more as a movie than I like The Descent. But if you said to me, if you just had to sit down and watch a pure horror movie in the month of October, what's your go-to? It follows House of the Devil, The Exorcist, The Shining. Or not The Shining, The Descent. Those are the movies I go to. Like, those are my ones. I don't even go to Psycho. Psycho is like a July movie. Like, I don't even care. Like, Psycho's a movie you can watch any time of the year, and it's just great. Like, I was talking about, I'm excited to watch the Universal Classic movies. Like, because you're going to watch Frankenstein and Dracula. It's like a cozy feel. It's, it's whatever. The Shining, to me, kind of transcends that. And I think that's why it's so high in my rankings, and I think it's why it's high in yours. Mm-hmm. And like, I was like, oh, I have it at 40. I'm probably going to move it down a couple of spots just because, like, also it doesn't help when you've seen a movie so many times. Sometimes, like, it kind of just like loses a little bit of its like whatever, but not much. I'm talking like maybe to 45, 46, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is such an artistic movie. Like, there is such art to this movie that even The Exorcist, which I really think is the best executed horror movie of all time, like, in terms of just pure horror, this movie is even more, it's so much more artistic than even that. And The Exorcist is an incredibly artistic horror movie. But this is just such an art movie. It takes its time. There's like an hour before anything really scary even happens, but we see Danny have his moment with the little girls and whatever, and then we get the girls with the axes and the blood and all that. Like, the special effects are incredible, but we're watching a kid ride his tricycle around for days. Like, I mean, he just keeps riding his tricycle, let's get the different sound and whatever. And it takes its time. But it's just like, man, like, if you ask me, like, does this movie scare you? Not really. I mean, not, but I'm certainly terrified of what happens to Jack Torrance in this movie. Mm-hmm. And you're watching another man's descent into madness. What the real question is does that scare you? And I think that's my last thing. And then I'll actually let you speak for the first time in 10 minutes. But I think that's what's so hard with just horror in general, like for all people, because if you say something, oh, you got to watch The Shining, it's a great horror movie, and then they sit down and they watch it and they're not scared, they think that means it's a bad movie. That's not true. You don't have to be scared for a great horror movie to be a great horror movie.
Well, and that's the big thing. And I think, like, the big thing with The Shining is this is a Kubrick movie more than it is a horror movie.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the big thing. And there are people out there who very much dislike Kubrick and his works. So they're not going to like this. And when you watch a horror movie and you have heard all of these things about it, I feel like horror is one of the biggest genres to suffer from overhype.
Agreed.
I honestly, like, recently, there's been a lot of talk about horror movies recently from 2022, just how like strong they are. I saw Barbarian yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think it lived up to the hype because I literally went to that movie and the person who sold me my ticket said, "Oh, you're in for a treat."
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, it was good, but like, it wasn't phenomenal like everyone's making it out to be. And because I've been told how good it was, I kind of like tailored my expectations for it. But even then, like, I feel like the film met my expectations. It didn't exceed them at all. And The Shining, if you go in saying this is the scariest movie ever, you're going to be disappointed unless you're like really delving into how like psychologically terrifying this movie is, where it's examining human vice and how close we are to just falling off that wagon.
Yeah.
And, you know, becoming a dull boy.
Well, and here, so let's, now we've talked a lot about horror, but actually talking about this movie, Jack Nicholson goes nuts pretty early in this movie. Like he is,
like immediately.
He's mad early. And one of my favorite things that Kubrick does in this movie is he makes Jack Nicholson a total asshole to his family right away. And I think that's so important. There's so many theories about this, that Jack Nicholson sexually assaulted Danny and that he was abusive to his wife. And like, there are so many theories out there. And I think Kubrick wanted this to be open for those types of interpretations. But when we see Jack Nicholson the first time, he drives out to the Overlook Hotel, like you said, beautiful cinematography. I mean, how the hell you're getting those shots? But again, Razzie. And so we see him and he's talking to these guys and he's like, "Oh, this is great. Yeah, this sounds perfect to me." Like he's putting on his "I want the job" facade, calls his wife, "Oh, I'm so happy about this, blah, blah, blah." And then we see them all driving up together and he wants nothing to do with them. Like he wants nothing. They're trying to ask him questions. They're trying to do whatever. And he's already being rude. So now when he actually goes mad, we understand why Shelley Duvall is a little bit more willing to put up with it early on, because she's already been putting up with him as a pretty bad person. A lot of times when we see this, like with the Amityville Horror or even with Sinister or some, I'm not thinking of Sinister, I forget the other movie, but like where like a parent starts to go crazy and starts to kill people. Normally that parent is like shown in such a positive light. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it even harder. Like, oh, it's so sad that like now they're bad. I love that Jack Torrance is a dick from the start. Like Jack Torrance already has it in his body. It's already in his bones.
Yeah. And we're told right away from the first interaction we see Wendy have with anyone, it's her talking to the nurse about Danny after he's, had a seizure. And she's justifying Jack's abuse. Like Kubrick sets this up so early that there's this culture of abuse in this household, and that everyone's kind of willing to turn a blind eye because it's like, oh, that was the past. He hasn't drank in 3 years. Well,
isn't it like 6 months? It's not even like 3 years. It's like 6 months or something.
No, she says it was like 2 years or something like that.
Oh, did she? Okay.
Although Jack at one point says it's only been 6 months.
Yes, it's 6 months on the wagon, right?
Yeah, because he says that to
Lloyd or whatever his name is.
Yeah, he says that to Lloyd when we first meet Lloyd. So you already know that he's like drinking behind Wendy's back and stuff. He's being a little deceptive there and everything. And you also have to think about this. There's other things that are weird in the setup to this movie. Like, you find out Jack is an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden he can work 5 months in rural Colorado?
Well, because they left Vermont. He was in Vermont. There's this story, like, there's this backstory of, like, why did he have to leave Vermont?
Yeah,
there's more to that than they just moved to Colorado. Like, there's more going on than that. And I think it's the mystery around Jack Torrance that also makes him frightening. And I mean, what's your theory? And don't talk about Doctor Sleep. Somebody asked if that was going to be in here. I haven't seen
I saw
Doctor
that.
Sleep, but if you did, don't mention it because I don't know if it's. But what is your theory on like the picture and stuff at the end of this movie? Because I want to talk about that and how I think it relates to why Jack Torrance is the way Jack Torrance is. But what's your theory on the picture at the end where he's in there in 1921?
It's tough. I think the scene that most supports this theory is the bathroom scene with
Grady, which isn't even the same Grady as
yeah.
the Grady they talk about as murdering his whole family. It's a different Grady.
Yeah.
Different.
And it's Grady saying, I've always been here. And I think what it comes down to is, in the end, it is kind of undeniable that the Overlook Hotel is this source of evil and this evil entity unto itself. The supernatural, Kubrick didn't go so far as to remove the supernatural elements and to make it completely ambiguous, because we do have The Shining. Like, Danny's ability to communicate with Scatman Crothers and the dead.
Yeah.
So we know there are supernatural elements here. I think the Overlook Hotel takes over Jack. Like, I think it's that simple. And we see Jack in that photograph at the end when it's really just showing that it's the Overlook Hotel itself that has always been there.
Yeah, and so for me, I agree with that. And you know, there's so many different interpretations to this ending because it is one of those just like giant question marks, and Kubrick wanted it to remain a giant question mark. But to me, what I get from it is because, you know, they do the whole Indian burial ground, all that stuff, reincarnation, those things. To me, it's almost like Jack Torrance or some version of Jack Torrance is a recurring character. He was the caretaker. Like Grady says to him in the bathroom, "You've always been the caretaker, sir.
Yeah.
You've always been the caretaker." And it's almost like the evil of the hotel pulling back this reincarnated or new version of Jack Torrance to get him back to where he belongs, to where he is meant to die and continue to kind of just live out. It's like this cycle of just nonstop, you know, relentless living and dying because the place is haunted. We see the young girl who turns into the old like lady and in that one scene, or, you know, just at least like all sores and everything. We see that. And like, I think that those are, that's what I get from it. Like, but I think there's a lot of different ways you can take it, but it's the fact that Lloyd, even though this Lloyd, like Jack Nicholson at one point says it was like deja vu, but it was like so much more than that. And then he's talking to Lloyd, he's talking to the bartender, who are like the real people. And then when Wendy walks in, there's nobody there and he's just staring at nothing. It's almost like he's reliving it, or like it's all coming back to life because he's finally back there. That's just what I gain from it. But, you know, at the end of the day, like Kubrick, you know, leaves it nice and wide open for you.
Well, I don't think like Stephen King really, I've never read the novel myself, but I don't think Stephen King really, like, yes, it's less ambiguous than Stephen King, where it's very clearly supernatural influence, but I don't think he really leads more than that either, does he?
I don't know.
But yeah. I think, because I think the Overlook preys on Jack here to make him this vessel for the hotel's evil, essentially. And I think it starts way earlier than I thought it did. And I noticed it this time watching it, because in his first interview, the manager's literally telling him about this guy who murdered his family while doing the job that he is being hired to do. Like, first off, if you're hiring someone, don't tell them about the murders.
Don't tell them about that, yeah.
Don't do that. But like, that's the hotel right there. That's the hotel playing in it. It's this idea of suggestion, right? Because I think that's what a lot of this comes down to. I do think like everything escalates when Jack does have alcohol. I do think the Lloyd scene is Jack giving into his vices, but I think it's the hotel directing him to his vices, knowing that that's the way that it can fully gain control of him.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I don't know, like you can watch it for that. I know there was like the documentary Room 237 or something like that, like kind of dives into this more and everything. But like, I don't I don't like to watch those like here's the interpretation or here's what it is or like I just like to like watch this movie over and over and like think about it differently every time. Like this time for me, it was really like Scatman Crothers and Nicholson who stood out.
Yeah.
You know, like the first time you watch it, it's those horror elements. Like you're going to gain something different. Like every time you watch it. I mean, Nicholson in this movie, man, like he's had some great performances. There's an argument to be made that this is his best one ever. And I know that a lot of that came because Kubrick was an abusive dick, but like this could be the best Jack Nicholson performance. The stair scene with the bat and then it turning into the axe and like all of that stuff. I mean, Here's Johnny is obviously iconic. And like, if you ever want to learn about the history of where Here's Johnny came from and like what that took to get Jack Nicholson to say that, just go read like anything about the making of this movie. It's so crazy what Kubrick did to Jack Nicholson and the fact that Jack Nicholson even stood around and took it. But all of that being said, Kubrick's still the greatest director of all time. I don't care what anybody says, and I love him. But I'm glad I just never had to work with him. But like, there's so many great moments with that, and Kubrick wasn't known. Malcolm McDowell gives a great performance, but Kubrick wasn't known at this point for like producing these like larger than life great performances. Like I don't think Kubrick ever had somebody nominated for best actor in any of his movies. I don't think Ryan O'Neal might have for Barry Lyndon, but I'm not sure. I know Malcolm McDowell wasn't. But for the most part, like Space Odyssey, Keir Delua, who cares? Like I don't even know how to say his name, you know, like whatever. Dr. Strangelove, I don't know if Peter Sellers was. Peter Sellers might have been in Dr. Strangelove, but Peter Sellers playing 3 different characters in that movie. So it's not like it's one role that is owning everything. This is such like a tour de force where Kubrick's almost making somebody else the star of his movie, which was not something Kubrick did. Kubrick liked to be the star of the movies he was making. Jack Nicholson is the star of this, and the Overlook Hotel is even the star of this, which, you know, I just think it was like a maturity thing coming from Kubrick, because Kubrick only went on to make 2 more movies after this, which is really depressing to think about. But anyway.
Yeah, but I think his characterization, like Jack Nicholson, the thing I really noticed this time was the "if I'm in here, don't come in here" scene. Where he's yelling at Wendy. That happens so much earlier in the movie than I remembered it happening, and it's before he meets Lloyd.
Yeah,
which is like why on this rewatch I was really paying attention to the fact that like Jack isn't this rehabilitated soul, and like Lloyd isn't the person that pushes him over the edge here. He was already there. And just this being alone, being in the Overlook, being in the presence of this hotel and the entity that it is enough to push him over the top. Yep,
I totally agree. Yeah, and it's like it's preying on a weak person. It's preying on somebody who already has the evil inside of them. And I think that scene with him yelling at Wendy, like that's the scene where for me it's like, okay, she just took it. To me, like I really realized this time while watching the movie, like the abuse that Nicholson was putting his family through prior to going to the Overlook Hotel.
Yeah.
I was looking up something the other day about like the theory about the dog costume scene and like that was like the sexual assault part. Other thing. Whether it is or isn't, that scene's just so freaking weird and disturbing and whatever. And the score in this movie is so absurd. It is so ridiculously good.
I love the fact that Kubrick kind of went with the classical approach again with this, like he did with Space Odyssey. And like I said, like we get Bartok at the top of the film with the Dearest E-Ray. We get a little bit of that composer whose name completely slipped my mind right now. And then we get an awful lot of Penderecki. And Penderecki is just such a polarizing composer for people not like entrenched in modern music. You got The most common, like the most popular of his pieces is Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima, which is the piece that plays in its entirety during episode 8 of The Return of Twin Peaks during the whole like nuclear explosion sequence. It's a disturbing piece of music, and Kubrick uses Penderecki's music so wonderfully in this film to make everything feel so disturbing at just the right moment.
Yeah. No, there's like the music really does elevate the horror in this movie, which, you know, a lot of horror movies have great scores. I mean, Psycho, Halloween, you know, all those movies. But this one, while it's not like an iconic score by any means from the sense of like a horror score, it is so effective in those moments with the zoom ins. I think about the one that gets me every time is when Scatman Crothers is walking down and you're just like, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? And Jack Nicholson jumps around the corner, does that boom, like that super loud noise with him screaming at the top of his lungs. I mean, it's so good. It's so good. And I can hear the score in my head as I'm thinking about it. And like, yeah, I mean, it is, but again, I keep going back. It's an art movie. Like, what other horror movie is going to kind of approach it in that way? They just don't really. Some will try, but most of the time, it's like in almost like a pretentious way. This movie's not being pretentious. Like, it's just using it to the best of its ability to make its point.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of that's why people view this as like the best horror movie. A lot of like in that top 5 horror discussion of all times is because it's a horror movie that doesn't sacrifice the artistry of filmmaking when in its presentation, and that's just what it comes down to. Like, you can make a schlocky version of this movie. Check out the version that Stephen King made. Pretty bad. And Kubrick wasn't willing to do that. Like, he had the source material. He went against the author's wishes and made his movie out of it. And because of that, we get this movie that, is it the scariest movie of all time? No. But it has those moments. Is there a scene more iconic than the blood flowing out of the elevator?
No. I still don't know how they did it. I know that there's like all these stories about like how they did it, but I still don't know how they did it.
Yeah. Like, it's such a beautiful scene. And they use it a lot in the movie. I don't blame them, because I bet that scene was very expensive to shoot, and it was very much a one-time only type thing. So you better get your money's worth out of it. But it's so iconic, and then it's like intercut with the twins and with Danny's face. It's beautiful. Like, it's just so beautiful, and it's so Kubrick. And that's what makes this movie such a good movie in general, and it's why it can land at 24 on my list and 40 on your list, but not be the best horror movie of all time.
Yeah, exactly. Or really anywhere near like the scariest horror movie. But in terms of like a descent into madness, probably the best version of a descent into madness ever put on film, I think. I know you have like the Lighthouse higher up, but even the Lighthouse is like a different version of it.
It's different.
Yeah. That's just what my thing is with this right now.
Yeah,
for sure.
Do you know how this movie relates to the movie we talked about last week?
What was the movie we talked about last week?
Birdman. Do you know how this relates to Birdman?
I don't. How does this relate to Birdman?
There is a scene in one of the back hallways that has the overlook carpet in Birdman.
Really?
There is, yeah.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
I mean, that's one of the most iconic patterns in all of cinema.
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And it's used in everything. Everything uses this pattern. And that also just goes to show how Kubrick made this so iconic, is that like a carpet pattern is enough to evoke the feeling of this film.
And that's what I mean, though. Like, he focuses on every little detail. Everything is so detailed. The food, the music, like, not for nothing. Those like scenes in the ballroom, the amount of detail put into those to make it really feel like it's a 1920s party and everything like that. And they're so like inconsequential. Like, they don't like, yes, it's his descent into madness, but like, it's not like it needed to be so detailed. And yet you're like, wow, like, I feel like I'm back. Like, the carpet, everything is just so much detail. So much detail. And that's what Kubrick was always the best at. But
well, it's so much detail. Like I even texted you while I was watching the film asking why Wendy's reading The Catcher in the Rye. Like there had to be a reason behind it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the way you got to look at a Kubrick film, because you know he puts so much intentionality into so much intention into every single detail. I mean, we'll talk about his attention to detail with like Dr. Strangelove when we get to it in a few weeks.
Yeah.
But like this is a man who made sure every single shot was done so meticulously, and there was a reason behind everything. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the joys of revisiting his films, is that when you go back, you get to pay more attention to those smaller details, and then wonder what went behind that decision.
Yep, exactly. No, I'm a huge fan of this one. Obviously, we both are, and always a good watch. Really, at any time of the year, though. Like I said, like this isn't like necessarily October watch for me. Like this is a good winter movie. Like this is a good like December, January, hopeless. God, it's cold outside movie. Even though I live in Florida, so it's never cold outside.
Is it okay? While we're talking about the winter aspect of this, do you think it's really like the reasoning for why they're not open, the Overlook isn't open during the winter, is because it would cost too much to maintain the road? Do you think that is that true? Because I'm pretty sure that hotel would rake in the big bucks during.
No, I'm pretty sure it's because it's a haunted hotel and they know it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's because it's a haunted hotel and they know that like if people did get trapped there, they're just gonna have a bunch of people killing each other on the spot. Same reason, why don't they have the alcohol? Oh, it helps our insurance? No, it's because Grady got drunk and murdered his whole family.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the insurance. It's because Grady got drunk and murdered his whole family.
Yeah.
So fun times.
Okay. I know we're running a little long here, but we haven't talked about Scatman Crothers.
Love Scatman Crothers. Scatman Crothers is great. And I can't wait to talk about him in Cuckoo's Nest too, which is coming up.
He's so fantastic in this film. I love when we finally get to Dick Halloran's like Florida love pad.
Yeah.
I like
that girl's afro is huge.
Yes, that is a huge afro. But like, I love that scene because it's just like, who is this character? We're never told enough about Dick Halloran. And his his connection to Danny and everything. But Scatman Crothers is so fantastic in this film. He is almost wasted by how little we get him, even though he's probably in about like half an hour of this film.
I do love though, like when he is great, and I love the part where like it's like, oh, here he comes, and then he gets murdered like right away. Like he doesn't get the day at all. Like Scatman Crothers is really good though, and Scatman Crothers is just a good character actor. He's just a really good bit player. He's in a lot of movies from the 60s and 70s. Like he's kind of all over the place. So yeah, I'm a fan of Scatman Crothers, and I love he's another one. Like every time you watch it, you're like, I appreciate his performance so much more than I did.
Yeah. 100%.
Anyway, you got anything else you want to say, John?
I think we covered everything. No, I think that's everything. Yeah, I there's so much more we could talk about with The Shining.
You could talk about The Shining. You could do a whole episode just about The Shining, but
we haven't even talked about the fact that like the Danny actor was told he wasn't in a horror movie the entire time.
I know.
Like
he
there's
wasn't
so
even
many.
Shining.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things.
It's the fake trailer.
It's fantastic. Like, look into the making of this film. It's not easy to read into it because Stanley Kubrick is a major asshole, but it's still fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah. Well, that's what we got for this week. Those were 2 episodes really close together. We're not quite sure when the next episode is going to be. Probably the week of October 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, sometime in there. There's a chance it might have to be even later than that, but hopefully everything goes well, and that is when we can come back in. When we do come back, though, it'll be Zodiac from 2007 for John and LA Confidential from 1997 for me. So we're getting into number 23. That's our number 23. We appreciate you all listening. Thank you all for keeping this going. 77 episodes down, 23 to go. Pretty wild. But we'll see you all probably in about 2 weeks.